Welcome back. Here is part 2 of my inspirational video with Sophie Foster, owner of Rising Roots Farm. Well, you mentioned risks. And so would you consider yourself in the past, before you became an entrepreneur, were you a risk taker? Is that something that you think an entrepreneur needs to be able to do, is to take risks?
Okay, I would say I'm not a risk taker at all. I am like, I gotta have my ducks in a row and then I'll make a decision. But so I would say you don't have to be. But I would also say, I mean, you need it a little bit because at some point you just got to jump in and just trust the process. And I think that yeah, I would say I'm not a risk taker, but at the same time, I feel like I have the attitude of like, at some point you got to jump in and, you're going to learn a ton. And no matter what, you can't, I mean, you can fail in some senses, but the whole time you're learning and you're only getting better. So I feel like you don't have to be a risk taker, but I think maybe just like a little bit to get started.
What do you think has been the biggest challenge? What do you think, like in the past 2 seasons, and even getting ready for your very first season that you did, and all through the last 2 seasons, what has been the biggest challenge for you?
I would say a work-life balance. Work-life balance and yeah, I guess that's it. Work-life balance. Because it's right in my backyard, right? So it's just staring at me and there's always going to be weeds, there's always going to be stuff that needs pulled up. There's just always stuff to do. And so it's hard to have that there and um and not think about it all the time. And not only do you have to think about growing stuff, but you have to think about managing an employee and doing payroll and making networks and going to the farmers market and doing and planning events and all these different things. So I think that this season was better, I guess, than last season because I wasn't alone. But I feel like I had a lot more on my plate this summer, and yeah, I don't feel as burnt out, I guess, from last year because I have had those connections with people that I was like so wanting last year. But I feel like burnt out in the sense of like, oh yeah, I had like no time to myself this summer. So I'd say that was the biggest challenge for sure.
What do you find the most gratifying? What is the thing that gives you the most joy about what you're doing?
Having people come to the farm, 1000%. And just, I think for me, again, like I'll go back to staying with that family after feeling hopeless and after feeling, kind of devastated by what I was learning about. I just feel like that was life changing for me and learning to kind of, I don't know, I guess remembering how much I loved working outside and like remembering growing my own food and picking the food and sharing it with other people. That was huge for me, and I guess getting to share that experience with other people has been the most. It's just been amazing, and I really like it. And I think that's more of what I want to do is share that with other people.
You are a female farmer, and in a world that perhaps may not be dominated by females. So you're a female entrepreneur. Have there been any particular challenges as a female in what you're doing?
Um, okay. Well, I worked in carpentry for a year before this, and I feel like that was way more. I feel like walking into farming was like nothing because that was very difficult for me. So I think maybe someone else would have a different experience, but I walked into the farming kind of sector um, just with a lot of support, and I think that if anything, I've gotten more support because I'm a woman, which is amazing. And I know on my website I put on there because I have that background in social issues, and I obviously kind of have that mindset, and looking at like equality and discrimination and that kind of stuff. So I find it interesting, but at the same time, I feel like I had a lot of support, and there's a lot of support even just on the online community, just like through Instagram and connecting with farmers who have it way harder than I do, just because I lucked out and had that access to land and had support from family and friends. So I would say like it wasn't super challenging for me just because I had that bad experience beforehand. But yeah, I'd say I was kind of lucky, and I also just didn't really care anymore if somebody had a problem or anything about me being a girl working in, physical labor job or whatever.
Well, with that in mind, what myths would you like to dispel about farming in general? What would you like people to know?
Ooh. Uh, well, actually, just off the last point, most farmers around the world are women. And most people growing food around the world are women. So that's one myth. Second myth is you don't have to just drive around in a tractor all day. That doesn't have to be, your type of farming. Because I think that's kind of the image that I had of farming. And also, I guess I'll just do three. The third myth or like idea that I kind of want to debunk is farming is actually becoming kind of a radical act, especially for young people. A lot of people don't know how to grow food anymore, and that's something that I kind of want to get rid of. I think everyone should know how to grow food, and yeah, it's just kind of I feel maybe that knowledge is getting lost, and so you can farm this way with just your hands and seeds. That's basically how I'm doing it, and that is I think that's a huge kind of myth or idea in farming, is that now you need a tractor and like millions of dollars, but you don't have to do it that way.
Well, let me ask you this then. As a young person, as you pointed out, you have pointed out also quite rightly that people aren't, don't have the knowledge or the experience of growing their own food, and things are changing. Uh, Land stewardship is a big thing in our world, and so how do you balance those things between owning land and working the land and living off the land, and also perhaps reconciliation?
Oh, great question. Well, oh yeah, I don't even know where to start on that because I have so much to say about that. But so because again, my background's in that conflict studies and human rights, and I got really heavily invested and interested in indigenous rights and land rights. Um, and it's so connected to climate change and biodiversity and all these environmental issues. And so farming, just to kind of, make it make sense and connect it to myself, I guess, farming for me became something that solved issues for me or made me feel like I was doing something in these larger social issues, because the type of farming that makes me passionate about farming is actually stems from indigenous knowledge and like thousands of years of indigenous groups passing knowledge along the line. And so as a settler and as someone who's not indigenous, I think that there's so many ways that there can be reconciliation, especially in just recognizing, hey, most of the like effective land stewardship and just land management practices that we have come from indigenous groups and indigenous knowledge. That's like the first and foremost. Like we need to recognize that it's coming from these groups and give them, the attention and like the gratitude that they deserve, because we are in a time where we need this knowledge, especially with climate change and dying of biodiversity and all these issues. So yeah, first and foremost, we have to recognize that it's coming from these groups, and they're and like yeah, the sticky part that I have with just like I don't own the land that I work on, and I would love to do more work in just and creating land access. So I feel like I'm at the beginning of this like journey of how I can kind of do something within within these issues, because obviously I'm still learning how to grow food. So if I'm building a business on farming, I have to learn how to actually do it first. At least I'm struggling with that and having the time to kind of work within these social movements as well has been a struggle for me, because that's something that I really want to do. But I'd say, yeah, first and foremost, you need to like respect where this knowledge is coming from. And then we need to start getting obviously more land access, and then getting more, not only indigenous, but people in general from the BIPOC community. So that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Um, Especially like I'm an Embro, so I don't think I have found one person of color farming in Oxford County, unfortunately. And that is a big issue. And there's a long history of why that is today. And I feel like Embro and Oxford County in general, that's something that we need to look at. But yeah, there's just so much to that. I could go on forever and ever, but I'm just like one person who really wants to be a part of these movements and make a difference in them. And so I'm not an expert, but that's kind of where I'm starting, is learning from Indigenous elders and just like seeing how important that knowledge is and the role that it actually, does in the farming community, and then kind of going from there, I guess. But yeah, I hope that's a good answer. It's a complicated answer, but that's what I have, I guess, for now.
No, I appreciate that a lot. I personally believe in reconciliation. I am a rural entrepreneur as well. And, in 2015, it was right there, the calls to action, we can all implement them, and that includes farmers. And I admire and am inspired that, you're noticing these things, and that you're, the seven grandfather teachings, and the knowledge, and all of those things. And you are a young person that is an entrepreneur, that has your whole, career ahead of you in food. And so with that in mind, let me ask you this: what is your hope for the future of food in rural Oxford County, in rural Ontario, and maybe even in rural Canada? What's ideally where you'd like to see rural areas go?
Who? Yeah, that's another big question. Well, okay. Again, I'm not, the be all, have all the knowledge, wisdom keeper, but I think for me, I think that the small scale movement, just in general, is so important. Not only because people have more connection to their farmers with small scale farmers, but I think just this whole push for regenerative agriculture and regenerative techniques, which again is mostly coming from indigenous groups, is so important. And the farm that I'm working on is farmers that work conventionally. I used to have a big chip on my shoulder, like, and, feel like it was me against the world, but we can actually work together. It doesn't have to be, small against big. And, yeah, I think that what I want is like more connection between these groups, because between, this conventional and then people thinking small scale agriculture is like this radical thing, just because connection can make a big difference. And if we just talk to each other and maybe work together and learn from each other, a lot can happen. And we need different people coming together, because that's how we can get, the best knowledge forward, hopefully. And so I guess what I want for the future is I think that this kind of small scale agriculture, maybe not everybody has to be small scale farmers, but the idea and like a challenge against this larger kind of factory farming way of creating food, I think needs to be challenged. And so I guess that's kind of what I would like to see in the future. Not challenged in like an aggressive way, but just, maybe a little nudge of like, hey, maybe we can do this better, on an environmental level, on a health level, and just on a community level in general. And so that's kind of where I want to see it go on all those levels, I guess, like Oxford County, Canada, and the world in general. Yeah, there's just so much I could say about that. But I think it's just, yeah, building knowledge together and definitely like pushing these regenerative techniques on small and larger scales, for sure. That's what I'd like to see.
That's a great answer. And I have one last question. You talked about
Okay.
community and you talked about that you missed that. You missed being part of a community and that's why you invited people onto your space. And I guess for someone who is watching and starting out on their own, becoming an entrepreneur, maybe getting closer to the land, doing something different, what's your advice to them about how to build community?
Good question. Well, first, I think you just got to get started. At some point, you just got to jump in. I think a lot of people are scared to jump in, but you just got to do it because amazing things will happen. And I have gotten more support than I could have imagined from people at Community Future, like Community Futures Oxford, and just friends and family. Even like conventional farmers who I thought would be totally against me have helped me like more than I could imagine. And so I think that just like having faith that people are actually gonna create a community with you, whether you try to do it or not. And so people want to help you more than they want to, bring you down. And I think a lot of times people assume the opposite, but yeah, if I could say anything, it would be that people want to help you more than they want to bring you down. And so if I think if you just have that open mind of like you never know who's going to help you or who's going to, give you that piece of advice that you really needed, whether it's farming or just, being a business owner in general, I think that just having an open mind and not making like a closed box of like this is who I want community with, I think that yeah, there's more people out there that want to help you than anything else.
I am so inspired by what you're doing, and I really, really appreciate you spending time with us today. Thank you so much, Sophie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad that I got to do this with you.